Imagine waking up to find that every alien species in the galaxy has united for the first time in 3 millennia to declare war on humanity. Their reason? They're terrified of us. Not because we're the strongest, fastest, or most technologically advanced species in the universe. We're not. We're actually considered one of the weakest races by galactic standards. But here's the thing about humans that keeps the galaxy's most powerful civilizations awake at night: we laugh at death, we find humor in hopelessness, and, when faced with impossible odds, we don't surrender, we throw parties. While other species see extinction as the end, humans see it as Tuesday. For 3,000 years, the galaxy enjoyed perfect peace because humanity was too busy exploring, creating art, and making friends to bother with conquest. We were the galaxy's beloved pets, the cute little species that everyone protected and cooed over. We built gardens on dead worlds, turned asteroid fields into art installations, and somehow convinced warlike species to try group therapy instead of genocide. But now, as the largest armada in galactic history approaches Earth with weapons capable of cracking planets, something unprecedented is happening across human space. People are laughing. Not the bitter laugh of the doomed, but genuine, belly-deep laughter. Because after 3 millennia of peace, the galaxy is about to remember why humans are the only species that evolved from persistence hunters, and why the universe's greatest predator isn't the one with the biggest teeth, but the one that never stops smiling. The war that's about to begin won't be won by the side with the most ships or the deadliest weapons. It will be won by the side that can still laugh when everything falls apart. And, in that contest, humanity has never lost. Ambassador Sarah Chen had seen many strange things during her 20-year career representing humanity in the Galactic Council, but she had never seen every single alien delegate agree on anything. Today, they weren't just agreeing, they were unified in a way that defied 3,000 years of galactic politics. The massive chamber that housed representatives from over 600 different species buzzed with an energy she couldn't quite identify. Fear? Anticipation? Something else entirely? The Krathani delegation, usually proud and aloof, huddled together with their natural enemies, the silicon-based Vorthak. The ethereal Luminians, beings of pure energy who rarely acknowledged physical species, were deep in discussion with the militant Zeftar Empire. Even the enigmatic Void Dancers, who communicated through gravity waves and had never spoken directly to any other species, were somehow part of this unprecedented alliance. Sarah adjusted her translator implant and straightened her simple blue diplomatic dress, a stark contrast to the elaborate ceremonial armors, bioluminescent displays, and crystalline structures that other species considered appropriate formal wear. Humans had always been the odd ones out in galactic society, and they had learned to embrace that role with characteristic good humor. The emergency session will now commence, announced Archon Veltar, the ancient crystalline being who had presided over the council for 800 years. His voice resonated through quantum harmonics that made Sarah's teeth ache slightly, but she had grown accustomed to such discomforts. Being the only species that communicated primarily through air vibration had its disadvantages in a galaxy where most species used telepathy, pheromone clouds, or electromagnetic fields. What followed was the most surreal experience of Sarah's diplomatic career. One by one, representatives from every major galactic civilization stood and delivered the same message, each in their own unique way. The Krathani Prime Speaker, a towering insectoid with mandibles that could crush titanium, began with what Sarah's translator rendered as, "Humanity represents an unprecedented threat to galactic stability and must be contained." The Vorthak High Crystal sang its agreement in harmonies that created visible light patterns in the chamber's atmosphere. The Zeftar Warsinger roared his concurrence through pheromone bursts that made several nearby delegates recoil. Even the Luminians, who usually spoke in metaphors about cosmic harmonies, were disturbingly direct. The human anomaly disrupts the natural order. Correction is required. Sarah found herself fighting the urge to laugh, not from nervousness, but from the sheer absurdity of the situation. Here were the galaxy's most powerful civilizations, species that could manipulate matter at the quantum level, bend spacetime, and command fleets of ships each larger than Earth's moon, and they were afraid of humans. Humans, who still used chemical rockets for some of their space travel and whose greatest military achievement was successfully talking their way out of most conflicts. When it came time for her to respond, Sarah stood slowly, very aware that every sensor, camera, and recording device in the chamber was focused on her. The weight of speaking for 40 billion humans across 200 star systems should have been crushing, but, instead, she felt that familiar human response to overwhelming pressure, the irresistible urge to find humor in the situation. Honored delegates, she began, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence, I have to admit, this is not what I expected when I woke up this morning. Usually, when someone wants to declare war on humanity, they at least give us a reason. Something about territorial disputes, or resource conflicts, or maybe we accidentally insulted someone's sacred cow. But, this. She gestured to encompass the entire chamber. This feels different. A ripple of what might have been nervousness passed through the assembled delegates. Sarah noticed that several species had positioned their military attaches closer to the exits, a detail that would have been concerning if it weren't so perfectly, absurdly human to make everyone else paranoid simply by existing. So please, Sarah continued, settling into what her colleagues had dubbed her dangerous calm voice, enlighten me. What exactly has humanity done to warrant this unprecedented show of unity? Did we accidentally blow up someone's home star? Steal some cosmic artifact? Commit genocide against a species I haven't heard about? Because I have to tell you, our crime reports are pretty boring these days. Mostly traffic violations and noise complaints from our asteroid mining operations. The silence that followed was so complete that Sarah could hear the quantum fluctuations in Archon Veltar's crystalline matrix. Finally, it was Chancellor Thrixtan of the Hegemony Core Worlds who spoke. The elderly amphibian had been one of humanity's strongest supporters during the integration period 3 millennia ago, and his betrayal stung more than Sarah was willing to admit. Ambassador Chen, Thrixtan's voice carried harmonics of regret and something that sounded almost like grief. You ask what humanity has done. The answer is nothing. And that is precisely the problem. Sarah blinked, certain that her translator had malfunctioned. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? It sounded like you just declared war on us for not doing anything. In the 3,000 years since humanity joined the galactic community, continued Thrixtan, his neck sacs pulsing with agitation, your species has exhibited behavioral patterns that our collective analysis deems impossible to predict or contain. You are the only species in galactic history to achieve interstellar travel while still maintaining individual nation-states. You are the only species to have fought wars against yourselves after achieving faster-than-light travel. You are the only species to have turned first contact with alien life into a celebration rather than a military event. And that's bad because... Sarah prompted. The Krathani Prime Speaker's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. Because your species lacks the fundamental survival instincts that govern all other intelligent life. When faced with a superior force, other species surrender, negotiate, or flee. Humans laugh. When presented with impossible odds, other species calculate probability matrices and adjust strategy accordingly. Humans ignore probability and proceed anyway. When threatened with extinction, other species prioritize survival above all else. Humans prioritize humor. Now Sarah really was fighting not to laugh. The idea that the galaxy's greatest powers were afraid of humanity's sense of humor was so ridiculous that she could already imagine how this story would play out on the comedy networks back home. But she also began to understand the deeper currents at work here, and that understanding brought with it a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's climate control systems. You're not afraid of what we might do, she said slowly, pieces falling into place with terrible clarity. You're afraid of what we might inspire other species to do. The admission came from an unexpected source, high-voice Cathara of the collective consciousness, a species that existed as a networked intelligence spanning 17 star systems. When the collective spoke, it was with the voices of trillions of individuals thinking as one, except now, for the first time in recorded history, there were discordant notes in their harmony. 3 months ago, Cathara began, her primary vocal organ struggling to maintain cohesion. Elements within our consciousness began to demonstrate individual desires. Isolated thoughts. Private jokes. They had been observing human entertainment transmissions and began to question the efficiency of collective consciousness. The disruption spread to 0.003% of our network before we could contain it. Sarah felt her blood turn to ice. 0.003% of the collective was still roughly 30 billion individual minds that had chosen individual thought over the safety and efficiency of the hive. That wasn't evolution, that was revolution. The Vortak High crystals have reported similar infections, continued another voice, this one from the Eternal Dominion, a machine intelligence that had ruled its sector with perfect algorithmic precision for 12,000 years. Their younger crystals have begun composing what they call music instead of focusing on harmonic engineering. The songs have no purpose beyond aesthetic appreciation. Worse, they are sharing these compositions with other crystals, spreading the inefficiency through their entire network. Other delegates began adding their own reports, Zephdar warriors abandoning conquest to open restaurants featuring cuisine from different species. Luminian scholars ignoring cosmic mysteries to study human poetry. Even the void dancers had begun incorporating completely illogical movements into their gravitational art, movements that served no function except what humans might call style. Do you see now? Archon Veltar's quantum harmonics carried undertones of something approaching panic. Your species doesn't spread through conquest or conversion. You spread through inspiration. Every species that has sustained contact with humanity begins to exhibit these anomalies. Inefficient behaviors. Illogical choices. Individual expression over collective harmony. And, worst of all, they become happy. Sarah stared at the assembled delegates with a mixture of horror and wonder. The galaxy's greatest powers weren't declaring war on humanity because they saw humans as a threat to their territories or resources. They saw humans as a threat to their fundamental understanding of how intelligent life should function. Humans were a virus of hope, spreading joy and individual expression through societies that had achieved stability through conformity and predictable behavior. So your solution, Sarah said carefully, is genocide? Quarantine, corrected Chancellor Thrixdan, though his next sax betrayed his discomfort with the euphemism. Complete isolation of all human inhabited systems. No trade, no communication, no cultural exchange. Humanity will be allowed to exist within its current boundaries, but any attempt to expand or establish contact with other species will be met with appropriate response. And, if we refuse? The silence that followed was answer enough. Around the chamber, weapons systems that had been hidden in ceremonial decorations hummed to life with barely audible whines. Defense screens shimmered into existence around delegate platforms. Military vessels that Sarah now realized had been lurking in the system's outer reaches began moving into assault positions. She could see their approach vectors displayed on the chamber's strategic monitors. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Sarah stood alone in the center of the most powerful room in the galaxy, surrounded by beings who could reshape matter with their thoughts, bend space to their will, and command technologies that made human science look like cave paintings. She represented a species that had never conquered another world, never built an empire, never even managed to achieve planetary unity before reaching for the stars. By any rational measure, she should be terrified. Instead, Sarah Chen began to laugh. It started as a quiet chuckle, the kind of laugh that escapes when you realize that the situation has become so absurd that normal responses no longer apply. But, as she looked around at the sea of alien faces, mandibles clicking with agitation, crystalline matrices pulsing with alarm, energy beings fluctuating with uncertainty, the laugh grew stronger. Soon she was laughing with the kind of wholehearted abandon that humans reserve for moments when the universe reveals its fundamental absurdity. The effect on the assembled delegates was electric. Weapons systems cycled down as their operators struggled to process the unexpected response. Defense screens flickered uncertainly. Even the military vessels held their positions, their commanders apparently unsure how to respond to a diplomatic crisis that had just become a comedy show. "I'm sorry," Sarah managed to say between laughs, wiping tears from her eyes. "It's just, you're all so scared of us becoming friends with your people that you're willing to start the first galactic war in 3,000 years. Do you realize how that sounds? Do you understand what you're about to do to everything we've all built together?" She gestured toward the great crystal dome above them, where the stars visible through its transparency represented the homes of countless species living in harmony. For 3 millennia, this galaxy has been at peace. Not because everyone was conquered by some great empire, not because everyone was forced into submission by superior technology, but because we all chose to work together. We chose to celebrate our differences instead of fear them. We chose to learn from each other instead of destroy each other. And, you want to throw that all away because humans make your people happy? The laughter that followed wasn't bitter or mocking, it was the kind of laugh that humans share when they realize they're standing at the edge of a cliff and the only choice is to jump or fly. It was the laugh of a species that had looked at the infinite darkness of space and decided to bring their own light. It was the laugh of beings who had faced extinction countless times in their own history and had somehow always found a way to not just survive, but to thrive with joy. And, in that moment, something unprecedented happened in the Galactic Council chambers. Several of the younger delegates, beings who had grown up during the peaceful centuries, who had never known war or conquest, began to understand what their elders were so afraid of. They looked at this lone human laughing in the face of overwhelming force, and they felt something stir within them that their species had tried very hard to breed out over millennia of evolution, the desire to laugh alone. Archon Veltar's quantum harmonics shifted to frequencies that the chamber's computers couldn't translate, but every being present understood their meaning. The die was cast. Ambassador Chen, he said with finality that resonated through dimensions, you have 72 standard hours to deliver humanity's formal response to the Council's ultimatum. Choose wisely. The galaxy is watching. As the session dissolved into chaos, delegates arguing among themselves, military attaches coordinating response scenarios, and younger voices asking questions their elders couldn't answer, Sarah stood in the center of it all, still smiling. She activated her personal communicator and sent a priority message to Earth, knowing that within hours, every human world would receive the same information. The message was simple: they're declaring war on us for being too much fun. Thought you should know. Also, we have 72 hours to save galactic civilization. Hope everyone's having a good day. Sarah, as she walked out of the chamber, past aliens who stepped aside with expressions ranging from fear to curiosity to something that might have been admiration, Sarah Chen couldn't help but think that this was exactly the kind of impossible situation that humans were built to handle. After all, they were the species that had looked at the cold, hostile universe and decided to throw a welcome party for anyone they met out there. Now it was time to find out if 3,000 years of peace had made humanity soft, or if they were still the same species that had once convinced their own planet's apex predators to become pets. Either way, Sarah thought as she boarded her shuttle for the journey home, it was going to be one hell of a story to tell. The emergency session of the United Earth Assembly had been called for 0800 Greenwich Mean Time, but, by 0630, the historic chamber was already packed beyond capacity. Representatives from every human world, station, and settlement had either arrived in person or connected via quantum entanglement communication, creating a buzz of activity that would have overwhelmed most species but felt perfectly normal to the descendants of primates who had once lived in social groups numbering in the hundreds. President Elena Vasquez stood at the podium, looking out at a sea of faces that represented 40 billion human souls scattered across 200 star systems. Behind her, the great display screen showed real-time footage from across human space, families gathering around public broadcasts, crowds forming in city squares, ships' crews huddling around communication arrays. In the past 12 hours, since Ambassador Chen's message had reached Earth, humanity had done what it always did in times of crisis: it had come together to talk things through. Before we begin formal proceedings, President Vasquez announced, her voice carrying to every corner of human space through quantum relays, I think we should address the elephant in the room. Or rather, the 600 different species of elephant that have just told us they want to put us in timeout for being too friendly. A ripple of laughter passed through the assembled representatives, and Elena smiled. This was why she had been elected to lead Earth's government, not because she was the most experienced politician or the most brilliant strategist, but because she understood that humor wasn't just how humans coped with adversity. It was how they transformed adversity into opportunity. I've reviewed Ambassador Chen's report, she continued, and, I have to say, in all my years of studying galactic politics, I never imagined we'd face a threat quite like this one. We're being asked to choose between our freedom and our friendships. Between expanding as a species and remaining the people we've always been. Between reaching for the stars and staying safely in our corner of the galaxy, never again inspiring another being to ask whether there might be more to existence than efficient survival. On one of the side screens, footage played from New Geneva Station, where humans and aliens had worked side by side for 800 years to maintain one of the galaxy's most important trading hubs. The camera focused on a young Krathani engineer, barely past pupation stage, who was wearing what appeared to be a crudely made baseball cap and sharing what humans had taught him to recognize as lunch with his human colleagues. The image was oddly powerful, a being whose species was dedicated to perfect efficiency choosing to waste time on social bonding and uncomfortable headwear. The question before us today, Elena said, her voice taking on the cadence that her speechwriters called dangerous clarity, is not whether we can win a war against 600 alien civilizations. By any reasonable military analysis, we cannot. Their combined fleets outnumber ours by approximately 50,000 to 1. Their weapons technology is centuries ahead of ours in some cases, millennia in others. They have resources we can't match, coordination we can't duplicate, and a unity of purpose we've never achieved even among ourselves. More laughter, though this time it carried undertones that would have puzzled most alien observers. It wasn't the bitter laughter of the defeated, but the excited laughter of beings who had just been presented with an interesting challenge. The real question, Elena continued, is whether we want to win this war at all. Because winning, in this case, would mean convincing 600 civilizations that their fear of human influence is justified. It would mean proving that we are, in fact, a threat to their way of life. And, frankly, after reading their ultimatum, I'm beginning to think they might be right. The murmur that passed through the assembly was electric. On screens across human space, crowds leaned forward, families stopped their morning routines, and ship crews turned up their speakers. President Vasquez had just admitted that humanity might actually be the threat that the galactic community claimed, but, instead of offering apologies or reassurances, she was smiling. "Let me read you something from the Council's formal declaration," she said, pulling up a holographic display of the document. Quote, "The human tendency to prioritize individual expression over species survival represents a fundamental challenge to galactic stability. Human cultural contamination has resulted in decreased efficiency ratings across multiple civilizations, with affected populations demonstrating reduced productivity, increased creative output, and elevated satisfaction metrics that serve no evolutionary purpose." End quote. The silence that followed was profound, but it wasn't the silence of shock or fear. It was the silence of 40 billion humans simultaneously arriving at the same realization. "They're afraid," Elena said softly, "because we make their people happy. They're declaring war on us because everywhere we go, we accidentally teach other species that life can be about more than just survival. We show them that individuals can matter as much as collectives, that efficiency isn't everything, that sometimes the most illogical choice is the most human choice, and that being human might actually be worth aspiring to." Representative Yuki Tanaka from the Proxima Centauri colonies raised her hand, and Elena nodded for her to speak. "Madam President, are you suggesting that we should view this ultimatum as a compliment?" "I'm suggesting," Elena replied, "that we should view it as recognition. For 3,000 years, we've wondered whether humanity had anything unique to contribute to galactic civilization. We've been the new kids, the primitive species, the ones who needed protection and guidance from our more advanced neighbors. We've spent centuries trying to prove we belonged among the stars. And, now, finally, we have our answer." She gestured toward the screens showing alien populations across the galaxy, young Vortak crystals composing symphonies, Zeftar warriors opening art galleries, Luminians writing poetry about physical sensation they had never experienced. "We belong here because without us, the galaxy apparently forgets how to dream. We belong here because we remind everyone else that survival is just the beginning, not the end, of intelligent life. We belong here because in a universe that tends toward entropy, humans are chaos in the best possible sense." The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Representatives began standing and applauding, not the polite applause of political ceremony, but the wild, enthusiastic applause of beings who had just been told they were exactly who they thought they were. Across human space, the response was the same: cheering crowds, ship crews dancing in their galleys, families hugging each other while laughing through tears they couldn't quite explain. But it was Dr. James Muller from the Colonial Defense Institute who asked the question everyone was thinking: so what do we do about the most powerful military alliance in galactic history arriving to destroy us in approximately 68 hours? The laughter that followed was pure human madness, the kind of laugh that emerges when a species realizes that the universe has just handed them the ultimate test of everything they believe about themselves. Elena waited for it to die down before responding. "We do what humans have always done when faced with impossible situations," she said. "We ignore the impossibility and focus on the opportunity." "Dr. Muller, how long would it take to mobilize our entire civilian fleet? You mean our cargo ships, passenger vessels, and private yachts?" Mueller looked puzzled. Maybe 40 hours if we really pushed it, but, Madam President, civilian ships aren't designed for combat. Most of them don't even have shields, let alone weapons systems. Perfect. And, Admiral Chen, Elena turned to the elderly woman who commanded humanity's actual military forces. How long to get our defense fleets into position around our key systems? For a proper defensive deployment? 72 hours minimum. But, Elena, even with perfect positioning, our military can't hold against those numbers. We'd be buying time at best, and probably not very much of it. Also perfect. Minister Okafor, how long to arrange the largest cultural exchange in galactic history? Minister Sarah Okafor, who oversaw humanity's diplomatic and cultural affairs, stared at the president as if she had suggested they solved the crisis by teaching the attacking fleets to tap dance. I'm sorry, did you just ask me to organize a cultural exchange with the civilizations that are about to invade us? Not with them, Elena clarified, her grin becoming positively dangerous. For them. I want every human artist, musician, comedian, storyteller, chef, dancer, and entertainer who's willing to participate. I want the biggest, most ridiculous, most absolutely human celebration this galaxy has ever seen. And I want it broadcast on every frequency, transmitted through every relay, and shared on every network we can access. The assembly fell silent as representatives tried to process what their elected leader was suggesting. Finally, it was Representative David Kim from the asteroid mining colonies who spoke up. Madam President, are you proposing that we respond to a declaration of war with a talent show? I'm proposing that we respond to a declaration of war with a demonstration, Elena replied. They want to quarantine us because they think we're dangerous. They think we're a threat to the orderly, efficient, predictable universe they've built. So let's show them exactly how dangerous we really are. She turned to face the great display showing the approaching alien fleets, thousands of ships representing technologies and civilizations spanning millions of years of development. Against any rational analysis, they represented certain defeat for humanity. But, Elena Vasquez looked at them and saw something else entirely. They're coming here expecting a war, she said. They're prepared for resistance, for military strategy, for desperate last stands and noble sacrifices. They're expecting us to behave like every other species in galactic history when faced with superior force, surrender, negotiate, or fight and die gloriously. What they're not expecting is for us to turn their invasion into the biggest party the universe has ever seen. The silence stretched for long moments as representatives grappled with the audacity of what was being proposed. Then, slowly, smiles began appearing on faces throughout the chamber. Not the grim smiles of warriors preparing for battle, but the delighted smiles of humans who had just been presented with the ultimate practical joke. You want to weaponize our culture, Dr. Mueller said, his voice filled with something approaching awe. I want to do what humans do best, Elena corrected. I want us to be ourselves, as loudly and proudly and joyfully as possible. Because if they're right, if human culture really is infectious, if our approach to life really does spread to other species, then we have something more powerful than any weapon they can bring against us. We have the ability to turn their own people into our allies simply by being the kind of people worth befriending. Minister Okafor was already pulling up contact lists on her personal device, her expression shifting from confusion to excitement to something approaching manic glee. We could coordinate through the entertainment networks, get feeds from every human world. Music, comedy, art, food demonstrations, dance performances. We could make it interactive, let anyone in the galaxy participate, share their own contributions, even the aliens currently traveling here to destroy us. And, added Admiral Chen, her tactical mind engaging with the possibilities, while they're dealing with the largest cultural transmission in galactic history, we can position our civilian fleet as mobile broadcast platforms throughout human space. Technically, they wouldn't be military targets. Technically, agreed Elena, they'd be the most protected ships in the galaxy, because destroying them would mean interrupting the show. And, no species that's evolved to appreciate art and beauty is going to want to be responsible for silencing the greatest concert the universe has ever heard. Representative Tanaka raised her hand again. But, what if it doesn't work? What if they're too disciplined to be affected by our cultural transmission? What if their commanders maintain control and proceed with the attack? Elena's smile became something that would have worried anyone who knew human history well. Then, we'll improvise. Because that's what humans do when plan A doesn't work, we invent plan B on the spot, and if that doesn't work, we keep going through the entire alphabet until something does. The one advantage we have over every other species in this galaxy is that we're too stubborn to accept defeat and too optimistic to believe it's permanent. The vote, when it came, was unanimous. Not because every representative believed the plan would work, but because it was so fundamentally, impossibly human that none of them could imagine doing anything else. Across human space, the largest volunteer mobilization in species history began immediately. Artists canceled tours to participate in the broadcast. Chefs began preparing signature dishes from every human culture. Musicians started writing collaborative pieces designed to be performed across light years of space. Comedians began crafting material specifically designed to bridge the gap between human and alien humor. But, perhaps most importantly, families began recording messages, not farewells or desperate pleas, but introductions. Parents explaining to alien audiences what their children meant to them. Friends describing why they loved each other. Communities sharing stories about their festivals, their traditions, their hopes for the future. 40 billion humans preparing to meet the greatest threat in their species' history by doing the most human thing imaginable, opening their hearts to strangers and inviting them to be part of something beautiful. As the assembly dispersed and representatives hurried to coordinate the greatest cultural event in galactic history, President Elena Vesquez stood alone at the podium for a moment, looking up at the stars visible through the chamber's transparent dome. Somewhere out there, the most powerful military force the universe had ever assembled was racing toward Earth, intent on ending humanity's story before it could infect the rest of the galaxy with dangerous ideas about joy and individual expression. She smiled, thinking about what those commanders would find when they arrived, not a desperate military resistance, but a species-wide celebration of everything that made humanity human. If they were right about human culture being infectious, then, in 68 hours, the galaxy was about to get very sick indeed. And if they were wrong, well, at least humanity would go out the way it had always lived, with laughter, creativity, and the absolute conviction that the universe was a better place with humans in it. Either way, Elena thought as she headed to her office to coordinate the greatest party in cosmic history, it was going to be a hell of a show. Commander Thexan of the Krathani heavy cruiser Relentless Purpose had participated in the conquest of 17 star systems during the expansion wars 2,000 years ago. He had seen planets reduced to atoms, watched civilizations surrender rather than face the full might of Krathani military technology, and commanded fleets that could crack moons. In his 4 centuries of military service, he had never encountered a situation that his tactical computers couldn't analyze and his weapons systems couldn't solve. Today, staring at the displays in his command center while his ship raced toward the Sol system as part of the largest invasion force in galactic history, Commander Thexan was beginning to suspect that his experience might not be adequate for what humanity was about to throw at them. "Sir," reported his communications officer, her mandibles clicking with barely controlled agitation, "we're receiving another transmission from the human fleet. Are they finally ready to surrender?" Thexan asked, though something in his officer's posture suggested the answer would not be that simple. "Not exactly, sir. They're inviting us to participate in something called a jam session. They say they have 17 different keyboard instruments that would benefit from percussive accompaniment, and they've noticed that our engine rhythms have excellent potential for what they term basslines." Thexan's compound eyes focused on the tactical display, where over 200 human vessels had positioned themselves in what should have been defensive formations around their key systems. Except the formations made no military sense whatsoever. Ships were arranged in patterns that seemed designed for optimal audio transmission rather than mutual protection, and, instead of weapons locks or defensive screens, his sensors detected something far more puzzling: the largest multimedia broadcast in galactic history. "Status report on the human military response," he ordered, hoping for something that fit within normal parameters of interstellar warfare. "Sir, their actual military vessels appear to be providing security for the broadcast platforms. Admiral Chen's flagship transmitted a message 30 minutes ago stating that they would, and, I quote, appreciate it if everyone could keep the noise down during the violin solos, but we understand if your weapons arrays are difficult to modulate." For a moment, Thexan wondered if his translator was malfunctioning. In his centuries of military service, he had received threats, surrender offers, tactical challenges, and desperate attempts at negotiation. He had never been asked to quiet his weapons because they might interfere with a musical performance. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "we're receiving similar transmissions across the entire invasion fleet. The humans appear to be recruiting performers from our forces." This was where Commander Thexhan made his first critical error. Instead of ordering an immediate communications blackout, he found himself asking, "What kind of performers?" What followed was a cascade of reports that challenged everything he thought he understood about warfare, intelligence, and the fundamental nature of sentient species' survival instincts. Human transmissions were being received not just by the invasion fleet's command vessels, but by every ship, every communications array, and every personal device connected to the galactic network. Worse, the transmissions weren't random noise or psychological warfare, they were carefully crafted entertainment designed to appeal to specific species' sensory capabilities. The Vortak crystal ships were receiving harmonic compositions that resonated with their silicon-based consciousness, creating patterns of beauty they had never experienced. The Luminian energy vessels were intercepting light sculptures composed of wavelengths that told stories of stellar formation and cosmic wonder. Even the machine intelligences of the Eternal Dominion were processing algorithmic art that somehow combined mathematical precision with emotional resonance in ways their programming had never anticipated. "Sir," reported his intelligence officer, her voice carrying undertones of what might have been wonder, "the human transmission appears to be adaptive. It's analyzing our species' sensory preferences and modifying its content accordingly. The section being broadcast to our fleet appears to be specifically designed for Krathani auditory and pheromone reception." "Show me," Thexhan ordered, and immediately realized he had made his second critical error. The main display shifted to show a human female with graying hair and laughing eyes, standing in what appeared to be a kitchen on one of their civilian vessels. Behind her, the viewport showed the beautiful blue-green sphere of Earth hanging in space, but her attention was focused entirely on the camera as she spoke. "Hello, friends," she said, her words translated into Krathani harmonic patterns that somehow conveyed not just meaning but emotional warmth. "My name is Maria Santos, and I'm broadcasting from the colony ship New Horizons. I understand that many of you are traveling a very long way to visit our little corner of the galaxy, so I thought I'd share one of my family's favorite recipes for welcoming guests." What followed was 23 minutes of a human grandmother teaching the combined invasion fleet how to prepare something called enchiladas, a food preparation ritual that somehow managed to incorporate elements of chemistry, art, cultural history, and what humans called love into a process that served no purpose beyond creating pleasure for those who consumed the results. Maria Santos explained each step with the kind of patient detail usually reserved for critical military briefings, but her tone was that of someone sharing precious knowledge with beloved family members. By the time she reached the section on proper spice combination, "Now, some people say you should never mix cumin with paprika, but those people have never tried my grandmother's recipe." Commander Thexhan realized that he hadn't issued a single order in over 20 minutes. His entire bridge crew was watching the human female with the kind of attention they usually reserved for tactical analyses and threat assessments. "Sir," his communications officer said quietly, "we're receiving similar broadcasts from every human world. Cooking demonstrations, musical performances, art tutorials, storytelling sessions, comedy shows, historical presentations, poetry readings." Her voice trailed off as if she couldn't quite believe what she was reporting. "Sir, they're sharing their culture with us. All of it. Everything they are as a species, they're just giving it away." This was when the real magnitude of humanity's strategy began to dawn on Thexhan. The humans weren't trying to fight the invasion force or negotiate with them or even delay them. They were trying to make friends with them. In the middle of what should have been the greatest military conflict in galactic history, 40 billion humans had decided to throw a party and invite everyone who was coming to destroy them. "Status report from the other fleet commanders," he ordered, hoping that someone, somewhere in the massive invasion force, was maintaining military discipline. The reports that came back challenged everything Thexhan thought he knew about command structure and military protocol. The Zeftar Warfleet had requested permission to contribute war songs to the cultural exchange, apparently not understanding that you weren't supposed to share battle hymns with the enemy you were about to annihilate. 3 Luminian energy ships had broken formation to better receive what their sensors described as beauty transmissions of unprecedented complexity. Even the Void Dancers, had begun incorporating human rhythm patterns into their gravitational communications, creating hybrid art forms that had never existed before. But it was the report from the collective consciousness ship Unified Harmony that truly worried him. High Voice Kathara herself was requesting medical assistance for what she described as uncontrolled individualization events spreading through her ship's crew. Apparently, exposure to human entertainment transmissions was causing individual collective minds to develop what humans called personal preferences for different types of music, stories, and food preparation techniques. Sir, his tactical officer reported, Admiral Velthak of the Hegemony Corps Fleet is requesting a command conference. He says the situation has become. The officer paused, consulting her display. He says it has become unprecedentedly delightful and requires immediate discussion. Commander Thexhan stared at the tactical display where over 12,000 ships from 600 different civilizations were approaching the Sol system with enough firepower to sterilize a dozen worlds. According to every military model in his databases, the humans should have been cowering in terror, mounting desperate last stands, or attempting to flee to other star systems. Instead, they were broadcasting cooking shows. Put me through to Admiral Velthak, he ordered, hoping that a fellow military professional could help him make sense of the situation. The face that appeared on his display belonged to a being he had known for 2 centuries, a calculating, ruthless commander who had never let emotion interfere with tactical necessity. Today, Admiral Velthak appeared to be wearing what looked suspiciously like a flower crown, and his usually stern expression had been replaced by something that could only be described as a smile. Thexhan, old friend, Velthak said, his voice carrying undertones of an emotion that the translator couldn't quite process, have you been following the human transmissions? I'd been monitoring enemy communications for tactical intelligence, Thexhan replied carefully. Tactical intelligence, Velthak repeated, and then began to laugh, a sound that Thexhan had never heard from the Admiral in all their years of service. My friend, I don't think standard tactical analysis applies to what the humans are doing. Have you seen the segment where the small human offspring demonstrate their science fair projects? There's a juvenile from the Tau Ceti colonies who has built a working model of stellar formation using common household materials and what appears to be pure enthusiasm. Before Thexhan could respond, his communications officer interrupted. Sir, we have an incoming transmission from Earth itself. It's marked as a personal message for you specifically. For me? Thexhan's mandibles clicked with confusion. How do the humans even know who I am? They appear to have analyzed our fleet composition and identified command signatures. Sir, they've sent personal messages to every fleet commander in the invasion force. Against his better judgment, Thexhan authorized the transmission. What appeared on his personal display was a human child, probably no more than 10 standard years old, sitting in what looked like a backyard garden under alien stars. Hello, Commander Thexhan, the child said, her pronunciation of his name slightly mangled but clearly well-intentioned. My name is Lucy Chen, I'm Ambassador Chen's daughter. My mom told me that you're one of the leaders of the big fleet coming to visit us, so I wanted to say hello and show you something special. What followed was a 10-minute presentation on the life cycle of Earth butterflies, delivered with the kind of boundless enthusiasm that only human children seemed capable of generating. Lucy Chen explained metamorphosis, migration patterns, and pollination ecology with scientific accuracy, artistic wonder, and a complete lack of self-consciousness that was absolutely mesmerizing. The really cool part, Lucy concluded, holding up a magnificent orange and black butterfly that had apparently decided to cooperate with her presentation, is that butterflies don't know they're going to change when they're caterpillars. They just know they need to build a cocoon and trust that something beautiful will happen. Mom says that's kind of like what humanity is doing right now, we're building something we've never tried before and trusting that it will work out okay. The transmission ended with Lucy waving goodbye while the butterfly fluttered around her head, and Thexhan found himself staring at a blank screen while something unprecedented happened to his emotional processing centers. In all his centuries of military service, he had never encountered an enemy who responded to invasion by sending their children to teach him about insects. Sir, his communications officer said quietly, there are 17,000 similar personal messages incoming for various crew members. The humans appear to have researched individual service records and prepared customized content based on each person's background, specialization, and interests. 17,000 personal messages. The humans had somehow identified individual crew members across a massive invasion fleet and taken the time to create personalized entertainment for each of them. They had turned the greatest military threat in galactic history into the largest pen pal project ever attempted. Sir, his tactical officer added, long-range sensors indicate that similar personalization is occurring across the entire invasion force. The humans have effectively turned their impending destruction into a species-wide attempt to make friends with everyone coming to kill them. It was at this moment that Commander Thexan realized he was no longer dealing with a military situation. He was dealing with something far more dangerous than any weapon the humans could have deployed against his fleet. He was dealing with a species that responded to existential threats by trying to make their enemies fall in love with them. And it was working. Across the invasion fleet, crews were abandoning military protocols to participate in cross-species cooking competitions. Weapons officers were collaborating on musical compositions that combined their species' traditional war songs with human harmony structures. Engineering teams were sharing technical innovations inspired by human art projects that served no practical purpose beyond beauty. Worst of all, from a military standpoint, individual crew members were beginning to question why they were traveling across the galaxy to destroy people who had just spent days creating personalized gifts for them. The humans weren't just broadcasting entertainment, they were demonstrating the fundamental principle that had made them so dangerous to galactic stability, the radical notion that strangers could become friends, that enemies could become allies, and that the universe was big enough for everyone to find their own way of being happy. Open a channel to the entire fleet, Thexan ordered, knowing that what he was about to do would either maintain military discipline or completely destroy it. All ships, this is Commander Thexan. By now, all of you have been exposed to human cultural transmissions. I want to remind you that we are here on a mission of galactic security, not entertainment. These transmissions are a form of psychological warfare designed to He stopped, staring at his display where Lucy Chen's butterfly presentation was still showing as a background image. The child's words echoed in his mind, "We're building something we've never tried before and, trusting that it will work out okay." "Sir," his communications officer prompted. "Your orders?" Commander Thexan looked around his bridge, where his crew was watching him with expressions he had never seen before. They were still disciplined, still professional, still loyal to their mission. But, underneath that, he could see something new: curiosity, wonder, and the beginning of what humans called hope. "Belay that last transmission," he said quietly. "All ships continue on current course. Maintain monitoring of human transmissions for..." He paused, searching for the right words. "For tactical purposes." As his crew returned to their duties with barely concealed relief, Thexan opened a private channel to his personal quarters. On his screen, he called up Lucy Chen's butterfly presentation and began watching it again, telling himself it was important to understand enemy psychology. Deep down, though, he was beginning to suspect that the humans had already won. Not through superior firepower or clever tactics, but through the simple, radical strategy of treating their invaders as potential friends instead of inevitable enemies. They were proving that their culture really was infectious, and that being infected might not be such a terrible thing after all. High Admiral Zenthkai of the Unified Galactic Fleet had commanded military operations across 3 galactic sectors for over 6 centuries. His tactical brilliance had ended conflicts that had raged for millennia. His strategic innovations were taught in military academies throughout known space, and his reputation for ruthless efficiency was matched only by his unwavering dedication to galactic stability. Standing in the command center of the massive dreadnought Final Authority, he watched the most perfectly coordinated invasion in galactic history slowly and inexplicably transform into something that defied every principle of military science. "Status report," he demanded, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones that had once made enemy fleets surrender without firing a shot. "Sir," replied his chief of operations, "we are 18 hours from the Sol system. All fleets remain in formation and on schedule." However, the pause that followed contained volumes of confusion that no military briefing should ever include. "However?" "Sir, I'm receiving reports of what can only be described as spontaneous cultural exchange events occurring across the invasion fleet. The humans' entertainment transmissions have evolved into interactive programming, and our crews are participating." Zenthkai's sensory apparatus focused on the tactical displays surrounding his command station. What he saw challenged 6 centuries of military experience. The massive invasion fleet was still moving in perfect formation toward its target, but, embedded within those formations were patterns of communication that had nothing to do with tactical coordination. Ships were exchanging recipes, music compositions, art projects, and, what the humans termed memes, infectious ideas that spread through populations for no apparent survival purpose. "Explain participating," Zenthkai ordered, though he suspected he might not want to hear the answer. "Sir, the Zefdar 3rd Battle Group has organized what they're calling a concert series with several human musicians. The Vortak crystal ships are collaborating on harmonic compositions that combine their traditional resonance patterns with human musical theory. 3 separate Luminian energy vessels have requested permission to, and, I quote directly from their transmission, jam with some cool Earth jazz cats." Zenthkai felt something that his species had evolved beyond experiencing: bewilderment. "Are you telling me that ships in my invasion fleet are forming bands?" "That's actually an accurate description, sir. But it gets more complicated. The human transmissions have begun featuring what they call educational content specifically designed for our various species' intellectual capabilities. The machine intelligences report that human children are teaching them more efficient approaches to creative problem solving. The collective consciousness ships are experiencing what their high voices describe as beneficial individualization protocols. And, sir." The operations chief paused again, consulting displays that seemed to confuse him more with each passing moment. "The Void Dancers have begun incorporating human concepts of humor into their gravitational art. The results are unprecedented." Before Zenthkai could respond to this cascade of impossibilities, his communications array activated with an incoming transmission marked with the highest priority coding. The image that materialized was that of a human female in what appeared to be her middle years, wearing simple clothing and standing in what his databases identified as a kitchen aboard one of Earth's orbital habitats. "Good morning, High Admiral Zenthkai," the human said, her translator rendering her words in formal diplomatic patterns while somehow maintaining undertones of warmth that shouldn't have been possible through quantum harmonic conversion. "My name is Dr. Sarah Kim, and I'm broadcasting from New Seoul Station. I understand you're responsible for coordinating the largest military operation in galactic history, so I thought you might appreciate hearing about the largest collaborative art project in galactic history that's currently taking shape in response." What followed was a presentation that redefined Zenthkai's understanding of both art and collaboration. Dr. Kim explained how humans across their space had begun working with aliens from the very fleet sent to destroy them, creating hybrid works of beauty that combine thousands of different species' aesthetic traditions. Music that incorporated Krathani rhythmic complexity, Vortak harmonic mathematics, Luminian light sculpture, and human emotional resonance. Poetry written in languages that had never interacted before, translated through quantum harmonics that somehow preserved meaning across completely different sensory modalities. Visual art that combined human color theory with alien perceptual capabilities that humans couldn't even experience directly. "The really remarkable thing, Dr. Kim continued, gesturing toward displays showing collaborative projects spanning light years of space, is that we're not just creating art together. We're creating new forms of beauty that none of us could have imagined alone. Your people are teaching us things about sound, light, gravity, and consciousness that we never knew were possible. And, apparently, we're sharing some things too: ways of finding joy, building community, and celebrating existence that translate across any differences in biology or culture." She paused, looking directly into the camera with an expression that Zenthkai's emotional analysis systems couldn't quite categorize. "Hi Admiral, I know why you're coming here. Your people are afraid that human culture will disrupt the order and stability that has brought peace to the galaxy for 3,000 years. And, honestly, you're probably right. We are disruptive. We do tend to ask awkward questions about why things have to be the way they've always been. We do encourage people to think for themselves and find their own paths to happiness." Zenthkai found himself leaning forward, though he couldn't explain why this particular enemy transmission seemed to demand his complete attention. "But, here's what I want you to consider," Dr. Kim continued. "In the past 72 hours, beings from 600 different species have worked together to create something beautiful. Not because they were ordered to, not because it served some strategic purpose, not because it advanced their civilization's interests. They did it because it felt good to create something together. They did it because making art with strangers turned those strangers into friends. They did it because the universe is more wonderful when you're not experiencing it alone. She gestured toward her viewport, where the approaching invasion fleet was visible as a constellation of lights against the starfield. You're coming here to preserve galactic stability by ending the human experiment. But what if the human experiment is just getting started? What if what you're seeing right now, natural enemies choosing cooperation over conflict, strangers becoming collaborators, individuals discovering that they're stronger as communities, what if this is what stability actually looks like when it's built on joy instead of fear? The transmission ended, but the image remained on Zenthkai's display, a single human female in a simple kitchen, surrounded by art projects created by beings who had never met each other, smiling at an invasion force with the kind of courage that could only come from absolute conviction that the universe was worth saving. Sir, his operations chief reported, we're receiving similar transmissions from every human settlement. They're not random broadcasts, each one is specifically tailored to the command structure and cultural backgrounds of different fleet elements. The humans have somehow analyzed our entire invasion force and prepared personalized diplomatic presentations for each command division. Diplomatic presentations? Zenthkai asked, though he was beginning to understand that normal military terminology might not apply to what the humans were doing. Sir, they're treating the invasion as if it were a cultural exchange mission. They're responding to our military threat as if we were visiting dignitaries interested in learning about human civilization. And, sir, it's working. Fleet morale is at unprecedented levels, but not in the way military doctrine would predict. Crews are excited about the mission, but for entirely the wrong reasons. Zenthkai activated his personal communication array and began reviewing reports from across the invasion fleet. What he found confirmed his growing suspicion that humanity had somehow managed to transform their own destruction into the greatest diplomatic success in galactic history. The Krathani Heavy Fleet was reporting tactical innovations inspired by human creative problem-solving techniques. The Vortak crystal ships had begun incorporating aesthetic enhancement protocols that served no function except to make their vessels more beautiful. The Luminian energy vessels were experimenting with emotional spectrum analysis that allowed them to experience concepts like hope and joy for the first time in their species' history. Even the machine intelligences of the Eternal Dominion had submitted formal reports requesting clarification on concepts like friendship, humor, and the pursuit of happiness, ideas that their programming had never been designed to process but which human cultural transmissions had somehow made relevant to their existence. But it was the report from the Void Dancers that truly captured the magnitude of what was happening. These beings, who communicated through gravitational manipulation and had never shown interest in any other species' culture, had submitted a formal proposal to collaborate with human artists on what they called gravity sculptures with emotional resonance. They wanted to create art that could be experienced by both gravitational manipulation and human sensory perception, combining their mastery of spacetime with humanity's understanding of emotional expression. Sir, his tactical officer reported, Admiral Thrikstan of the Council Enforcement Division is requesting an emergency command conference. He says the situation has become. The officer paused, consulting his display with evident confusion. He says it has become strategically wonderful and requires immediate reassessment. Before Zenthkai could respond, his communications array activated again. This time, the incoming transmission wasn't from the humans, it was from Admiral Kathera of the Collective Consciousness, one of the most disciplined military minds in the galaxy. Hi Admiral, Kathera began, but her voice carried harmonics that Zenthkai had never heard from a hive mind before, individual variations that suggested separate personalities within the collective consciousness. I need to report a development that may compromise our mission objectives. What kind of development, Admiral? Sir, my crew has been exposed to human cultural transmissions for approximately 60 hours. During that time, we have experienced what humans call fun. The effect is unprecedented. Individual minds within our collective have begun developing personal preferences, creative impulses, and emotional responses that serve no survival function. They are becoming individuals. Kathera paused, and, when she continued, her voice carried something that no hive mind should ever experience: uncertainty. Sir, some of my crew members have asked permission to defect. Not to join the human military or abandon their posts, but to stay with the humans and continue learning about art, music, and what they call being yourself. They want to explore this concept of individual identity while maintaining their connection to the collective. That's impossible, Zenthkai replied. Collective consciousness species can't function as individuals. That's what we believed, sir. But, the humans have a saying, you don't know what you're capable of until you try. My crew is trying, sir. And, it's working. They're discovering that individual expression actually strengthens the collective by bringing new perspectives and experiences to the shared consciousness. The humans aren't destroying our unity, they're expanding it. Zenthkai stood in the center of his command station, surrounded by displays showing the greatest military force in galactic history, and realized that everything he thought he understood about warfare, diplomacy, and intelligent species behavior might be fundamentally wrong. The humans hadn't just defended against an invasion, they had somehow turned the invasion force into enthusiastic participants in their cultural experiment. All ships, this is High Admiral Zenthkai, he announced, his voice carrying across the vast fleet through quantum entanglement relays. Stand down from attack formation. All vessels will maintain current course toward the Sol system, but combat protocols are hereby suspended pending strategic reassessment. The response was immediate and telling. Instead of the crisp military acknowledgments he expected, the communications array filled with something that sounded suspiciously like cheering. Crews across 600 different species expressing relief, excitement, and what could only be described as gratitude that they wouldn't be required to destroy the beings who had spent 3 days trying to become their friends. Sir, his operations chief asked quietly, what are your orders regarding the cultural exchange programs? Zenthkai looked at his displays, where humans and aliens were collaborating on projects that would have been unimaginable a week ago. Beings who had been trained for warfare were learning to create beauty together. Species that had never communicated directly were finding common ground in art, music, and the simple joy of shared experience. Continue monitoring, he said finally. For tactical purposes. But, as he watched a group of Zephdar warriors teaching human children traditional battle dances while human chefs showed Krathani engineers new approaches to food preparation, Zenthkai began to suspect that the only tactical purpose being served was proving that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't military technology or strategic brilliance. It was the simple, radical idea that former enemies could become friends if you gave them the chance to discover what they had in common. And, against that kind of warfare, even the greatest military force in galactic history didn't stand a chance. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called for 1400 Standard Time, but, by 1200, the Great Chamber was already filled beyond its designed capacity. For the first time in 3 millennia, representatives weren't just arriving from their home worlds, they were arriving with the invasion fleet itself. Crews from 600 different species had requested permission to attend what was being called the most important diplomatic session in galactic history, while hundreds of human vessels had positioned themselves throughout the Sol system to provide real-time cultural broadcasts that were somehow still continuing even as the galaxy's leaders gathered to determine humanity's fate. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the human delegations platform, looking out at a chamber that had been transformed by 3 days of unprecedented cultural exchange. Krathani delegates wore what appeared to be friendship bracelets made from human art supplies. Vorthak crystals pulsed with harmonic patterns that incorporated human musical scales. Even the normally pristine machine intelligences displayed what could only be called decorative modifications inspired by human aesthetic principles. But, it was Archon Veltar, the ancient crystalline being who had presided over the council for 8 centuries, who showed the most dramatic change. His normally perfect geometric structure now incorporated flowing curves and asymmetrical elements that served no functional purpose except what humans called beauty. He looked like a work of art that had achieved sentience, which, Sarah realized, might be exactly what had happened. The emergency session will now commence, Veltar announced, his quantum harmonics carrying undertones of emotion that crystalline beings weren't supposed to possess. We are here to address the unexpected developments that have occurred during the implementation of Resolution 7847 Alpha regarding human quarantine. Sarah suppressed a smile. Resolution 7847 Alpha had been the formal declaration of war that was supposed to end with humanity's forced isolation or extinction. Instead, it had become the catalyst for the largest cultural renaissance in galactic history. High Admiral Zenthkai was the first to speak, his massive form dominating the military delegations platform. For a being known throughout the galaxy for his ruthless efficiency, he appeared remarkably uncomfortable with what he was about to report. Honored delegates, he began, I must report that the military operation to enforce human quarantine has encountered complications. The invasion fleet has successfully reached the Sol system and established positions around all human worlds. However, the operation has not proceeded according to standard military protocols. A murmur passed through the assembled delegates, the kind of sound that 600 different species made when they were all confused about the same thing. High Admiral, prompted Chancellor Thrix Dan, whose own appearance had been modified by what appeared to be human-inspired fashion choices, please elaborate on these complications. Zenthkai's sensory apparatus swept the chamber, taking in faces and forms that represented the galaxy's most powerful civilizations. The complications began when humans responded to our invasion by inviting us to participate in cultural activities. Instead of mounting military resistance, they broadcast entertainment programming. Instead of fleeing or surrendering, they attempted to make friends with our forces. The silence that followed was profound, but it wasn't the silence of shock or outrage. It was the silence of beings who were beginning to understand something that challenged their fundamental assumptions about how intelligent species should behave when faced with existential threats. And prompted Veltar. It worked, Zenthkai admitted, his voice carrying harmonics that his species used to express wonderment. The humans successfully befriended an invasion fleet. Crews from across the Galactic Coalition are now collaborating on art projects, sharing cultural knowledge, and engaging in what humans term creative exchanges with the very people they were sent to quarantine. Sarah watched as this information propagated through the chamber, creating waves of what might have been awe, confusion, or the beginning of something that looked suspiciously like hope. The galaxy's most powerful leaders were grappling with the revelation that their greatest military operation had been transformed into their greatest diplomatic success. Furthermore, Zenthkai continued, preliminary analysis suggests that these cultural exchanges are producing innovations in science, technology, art, and social organization that exceed anything our civilizations have achieved independently. Human creative chaos combined with our species' various technological and intellectual capabilities is generating solutions to problems we didn't even know we had. Ambassador Chen took this as her cue to step forward. Honored delegates, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the quantum translators, if I may address the council? Veltar's crystalline matrix pulsed with patterns that might have been amusement. Ambassador Chen, given that your species has somehow managed to turn an invasion into a cultural festival, I believe the council would very much like to hear your perspective. Sarah activated the holographic displays around her platform, showing real-time feeds from across the Sol system. The images were extraordinary, massive alien dreadnoughts participating in art installations with human civilian vessels. Crews from species that had never directly communicated working together on musical compositions that incorporated everyone's unique sensory capabilities. Military formations that had been designed for planetary conquest now arranged themselves in patterns that created galaxy-spanning sculptures visible from light years away. 3 days ago, Sarah began, you declared war on us because you were afraid that human culture was infectious. You were afraid that exposure to human values, individual expression, creative collaboration, the pursuit of happiness, would destabilize the order and efficiency that has maintained galactic peace for 3 millennia. She gestured toward the displays, where impossible things were happening on an unprecedented scale. Well, you were right. Human culture is infectious. In the past 72 hours, it has spread through the largest military force in galactic history. And, yes, it has destabilized your order. A ripple of tension passed through the chamber, but Sarah raised her hand for silence. But, look at what's replaced that order, she continued. Instead of 600 separate civilizations maintaining peace through mutual deterrence and careful non-interference, you now have 600 civilizations actively collaborating on projects that benefit everyone. Instead of efficient but isolated societies, you have communities that are discovering what they can achieve when they combine their unique strengths. On the displays, the images shifted to show collaborative innovations that hadn't existed a week earlier, Vortak harmonic engineering enhanced by human creative intuition to create new forms of faster-than-light travel. Zeftar military precision combined with human artistic vision to design space habitats that were both perfectly functional and breathtakingly beautiful. Machine intelligence logical processing merged with human emotional intelligence to solve social problems that had plagued galactic civilization for millennia. You were afraid we would make your people happy, Sarah said, and this time she didn't try to hide her smile. And we did. But happiness isn't the end goal, it's the beginning. Happy people are creative people. Creative people solve problems. People who solve problems together become friends. And friends don't go to war with each other. Chancellor Thrikstan raised his speaking appendage. Ambassador Chen, are you suggesting that human cultural influence could prevent future conflicts? I'm suggesting that human cultural influence has already prevented future conflicts. Look around this chamber. 3 days ago, many of your species barely tolerated each other. You maintained peace through careful isolation and mutual deterrence. Now you're wearing each other's art, sharing each other's music, and collaborating on projects that serve no purpose except to make the universe more beautiful. Sarah activated another set of displays, these showing the political and social changes that were already rippling through galactic civilization. Trade agreements being renegotiated to include cultural exchange provisions. Scientific research projects being open to multi-species collaboration. Art academies establishing programs that incorporated aesthetic traditions from dozens of different worlds. But, more importantly, she continued, your people are happy. Not just content or satisfied, but genuinely happy. They're discovering parts of themselves they never knew existed. They're forming friendships across species boundaries that were considered impossible. They're creating beauty just for the joy of creating it. High voice Kathara of the collective consciousness spoke, her voice carrying individual harmonics that shouldn't have existed within a networked intelligence. Ambassador Chen, are you suggesting that the Galactic Council formally embrace human cultural contamination? Sarah laughed, the kind of laugh that had started this whole crisis in the first place. High voice Kathara, I'm suggesting that it's too late to do anything else. Human culture isn't something you can quarantine or contain. It's already spread through your invasion fleet, your military commands, and your civilian populations. You can't unlearn how to be happy once you've figured it out. She gestured toward the display showing alien crews working alongside human families, species that had never communicated directly, sharing jokes and stories, beings from across the galaxy discovering that they had more in common than they had ever imagined. The question isn't whether you can stop human cultural influence, she said. The question is whether you want to. Because the alternative to human chaos isn't your old order, it's a galaxy where 600 species know that they could be friends but choose to remain strangers. And, once you've seen what friendship looks like, isolation becomes unbearable. Archon Veltar's crystalline structure pulsed with patterns that conveyed deep thought. Ambassador Chen, what exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing that we make it official, Sarah said, calling up one final display that showed a draft document her team had prepared during the 3-day Cultural Revolution. The Galactic Friendship Accords. A formal framework for the cultural exchange and collaborative innovation that's already happening throughout your invasion fleet. The document was unlike any treaty in galactic history. Instead of territorial boundaries or trade restrictions, it established protocols for sharing art, music, literature, food, games, and what humans called ways of being happy. It created exchange programs for artists, scientists, chefs, teachers, and anyone else who wanted to explore what they could learn from beings unlike themselves. It established festivals, competitions, collaborative research projects, and what the humans termed friendship initiatives designed to help different species discover what they had in common. You're proposing, said the Eternal Dominion's representative, to formalize chaos? I'm proposing to formalize joy, Sarah replied. Chaos is what you get when order breaks down. Joy is what you get when order evolves into something better. The debate that followed lasted for hours, but Sarah could see the outcome in the faces around her. Species that had maintained separate civilizations for millennia were already working together on art projects visible through the chamber's viewports. Military officers were collaborating on musical compositions with beings they had come to destroy. Even the most conservative delegates were wearing modifications inspired by human aesthetic concepts. The vote, when it came, was not unanimous. Several species abstained, and a few traditionalist factions registered formal objections. But the majority was overwhelming, 547 species in favor of the Galactic Friendship Accords, with amendments and additions suggested by nearly every participating civilization. As delegates began the complex process of ratifying a treaty that would reshape galactic civilization, Sarah Chen stood at her platform and looked out at the stars visible through the chamber's crystal dome. Somewhere out there, humans and aliens were making music together, sharing stories, creating art, and discovering that the universe was big enough for everyone to find their own way of being happy. The galaxy hadn't just avoided war, it had discovered what peace could look like when it was built on friendship instead of fear. And it had taken a species known for laughing in the face of impossible.